Good evening and welcome to the July 11th, 2023 edition of the Downers Grove Village Council. Mayor Barnett is off touring Pure, Michigan, so I'll be filling in for him tonight. Would you all please rise and join us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Rosa, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Barnett. Commissioner Jose.
Here.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit.
Here.
Commissioner Gilmartin.
Here.
Commissioner Glover.
Here.
Commissioner Tully. Commissioner Davenport.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum. Is there a motion with regard to the minutes?
Mayor Pro Tem, I move to adopt the June 20th, 2023 Village Council meeting minutes as presented.
Second.
Any comments, questions, or corrections on the minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes pass unanimously. That brings us to item 4, public comments. This is an opportunity for members of the public to come and address the council on items of concern that are not on tonight's agenda. So if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, we'd love to hear from you. I'm not seeing a stampede toward the microphone. Okay. That brings us to the consent agenda. May I have a motion with regard to the consent agenda?
Mayor Pro Tem, I move to adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any public comment on the consent agenda? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit.
Aye.
Commissioner Gilmartin.
Aye.
Commissioner Davenport.
Aye.
Commissioner Glover.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Jose.
Aye. That matter passes unanimously. We have no active agenda tonight, so that brings us to our first reading, item 7. We have 3 items on the first reading agenda tonight, and I will turn it over to Village Manager Dave Fieldman.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yes, you're correct. 3 items, really 2 topics for discussion tonight. The first 2 have to do with traffic concerns and considerations in our community. And here to present background information on these 2 items is our Assistant Director of Public Works on the engineering side, Scott Vasco.
Good evening, Scott.
Good evening. So tonight I'll be presenting the amendments to Chapter 14 and the TAP Commission recommendations from the June 14th meeting. The first items will be the amendments to Chapter 14, including codifying previous temporary manager approvals and TAP Commission recommendations from the June 14th meeting. First item, 2 items are the codifying the temporary manager approvals to revise the limits of the existing no parking area to include the east side of Mid-Hall, south of Ogden, and revise the time limit of the existing no parking area on and outside of Franklin at the start of 10 a.m. And then our next 2 items are recommendations from the June 14th TAP Commission meeting. The first is a petition that was received for intersection control modification at Fairmount and Summit. TAP recommended the following changes be made. At Fairmount and Summit, revised to an all-way stop control. At Fairmount Park, replace the yield signs to convert to a 2-way stop control. And at Fairmount and Benton, replace the yield signs with a 2-way stop control. The next sign here shows what we've got now. So along Summit, at the intersections of Park, Fairmount, and Benton, we have yield going east and west. The recommendation is to do a 2-way stop at Park and Bennett, and then do an all-way stop at Summit and Fairmount. The second petition we had on the June 14th TAP Commission meeting was to close the intersection, north leg of the intersection at Fairmount and 55th Street. So after receiving the petition, staff studied the neighborhood, highlighted in yellow. That's Main Street to the west, Fairview to the east, Maple to the north, 55th Street to the south. We analyzed traffic counts, analyzed data, and crash data. So upon our study, these were the findings that staff found. Traffic counts on all streets intersecting 55th Street, and traffic levels are down 34% since Neighborhood Traffic Study 1 that was conducted in 2011. Speeds were collected and compared to traffic study number 1 and are typical and within traffic ranges based upon past studies throughout the village. And then the crash data that was collected throughout the neighborhood from the last 5 years, January of 18 to June of 23. So no locations with higher than usual crash locations. So based on that data, TAP recommended that we do not close the north leg of the intersection. The reasons for that is it doesn't meet the street closure policy or the traffic calming policy of the village. Second, construction of the cul-de-sac on a designated collector street would impede traffic flow, alter intended use of the streets, and impact village services such as snow plowing, emergency services, things like that. Proposed change would also divert traffic to existing surrounding local streets and change the access to the neighborhood. And also, we had multiple responses from residents who were opposed to the street closure as well. So, based on those findings, TAP recommended the following traffic calming measures. Installation of pavement striping to visually narrow the roadway, installation of additional enhanced speed limit signs, use of speed feedback signs on a rotating basis, increased enforcement efforts to deter violations of posted limits. We'd review our snow and ice policy related to the south leg of the intersection of 55th and Fairmount, where we've got the hill. Review recommendations from Neighborhood Traffic Study 9, which is going on right now and will be completed in the fall for the area south of 55th to 59th and Fairmount, and then possibly consider potential signage or countermeasures to address the downslope area during winter months. So, with that, I'm open up to questions.
Any questions from the council? Commissioner Susk, if you could.
Yeah, I do have one. Just because it has been an area of interest for a lot of local residents, do we have data on, if striping reduces speed? And if so, do we have even potentially examples within the village of where that's worked?
We're familiar with some studies that show that it is effective, and there are some studies that show maybe not that effective. In our recent experience, we've been doing center lane striping in combination with some of the other things that you see here recommended tonight. And in our look back, we think that generally the combination of all those things has worked and achieved some of the goals. So we haven't isolated center lane striping because we've not, to my knowledge, not done a project that was only center lane striping. But as a package deal, it appears to be working in recent locations.
Would we be able to get maybe a few examples of the recent locations?
I think we have a couple right here.
Yeah, actually,
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, we've done it on Fairmount between Summit and Randall. We have it there, just north of the area
Yep.
that we're talking about now. We just did it on Carpenter from Maple to Gilbert. That was just resurfaced this past year, so we did it there. Washington from Summit to Maple, and then we're in the process of resurfacing 71st right now from Dunham to the village limits. So we'll be putting it there as well.
Thank you. Great, thank you so much.
Commissioner Glover.
I guess to piggyback on Leslie's comments, given the fact that all the data and speed was typical and within the expected range, what would be the added benefit of doing the striping? Like if it's already, the speeds are already within the expected range?
Yeah, when you start with a condition where the speeds are within expected range, I think we can all agree that there's probably not a lot of incremental change from that, so we'll just be looking for direction from the council on that, whether you'd like us to install the striping or not.
Any other questions? Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Any public comment with regard to the items that were just presented?
Hello, I'm Karen Crow, 5408 Fairmount Avenue. So that's about halfway down the block from 55th to Summit Street. And we were some of the witnesses of the accident. And I'm a little bit surprised that we don't have more representation here. We've had communication, email with others on the block. And there, in particular, Mike Jenick has been sort of spearheading this as it happened right in his front yard. That is the rollover and the ejection from the car and the victim dying in his front yard. I hate to be over the top about that, but it still is something that has shaken our family. And we understand that the recommendations are typical to standard procedure. Mike, again, I'm surprised he's not here. We did talk about him being here. He is an appraiser and has been for 20-plus years. And his immediate comment was he never would have bought the house on a street with a double yellow line because it immediately depreciates the home value. So there's big concern that those of us who live in that block will now be the victims of depreciating home values. I'm not the professional on that, and again, I wish Mike were here to speak to that. When he mentioned this, though, I went online looking for some other kind of research that might indicate if that was the case, and also in the other research I had done ahead of that, with many of the other recommendations being things like enhanced speed limit, speed humps, doing a right turn only, and all of those things that were discussed at the last meeting. The article that I highlighted and sent to the council was one that said speed humps were really the only effective long-term and not permanent, but because it is a physical barrier and the other ones are sort of up to the driver to determine, you know, if they want to follow the speed limit, if they want to stay within the lines. Speed humps are impossible to avoid, and they are cost-effective and can be temporarily placed and removed if they aren't getting the results they want. In my search, again, to try to find, and I know I'm probably limited in time, so I won't go on and on, but to find more information about both of those things, whether double yellow lines really are effective and depreciated home value. And I came across an article that was published just 2 months ago from a community near Springfield, Massachusetts. Their village had painted double yellow lines on a stretch of a residential street. It was done overnight because that's typically when the painting is done to not disrupt traffic flow. But the residents woke up to this and they hadn't been alerted, so they were understandably upset, and their board at that point decided to hold a public meeting and heard a lot of their comments, which I think, heard their comments, which I think a lot of them are ones that we can learn from and should be taken into account before you go and paint those yellow lines. I hope someone else does the research about depreciating home values with double yellow lines, but these were some of the resident comments. Okay, in their case, homes on the street with the double yellow lines were selling for $100,000 less than homes on neighboring streets. Now, of course, we know there are a lot of other things that can go into that. That's a huge number, and I would like to know, like, what would be the case on our street. Another one, double yellow lines signal that the street is a town-sanctioned cut-through artery, and I know that there was a lot of concern that Fairmount was had become the predominant cut-through since it's one of few streets that goes through to 63rd. There was a resident, you know, at this meeting who's a designer at Ford Motor Company, and he said, quote, "Speed is about perception on a street. Double yellow lines are used to separate high-speed traffic in both directions." And he asked, end quote, he asked the town to consider different speed abatement techniques. There was an 11-year-old resident who rides her bike with friends to school on the street, and we have a lot of kids and a lot of bikers on our street. And this 11-year-old said the lines make the street look like a highway and that cars seem to travel faster. Again, that's her impression, but just something that I think we should consider. And in addition, the first step that they took was to place speed limit signs, which did not work. And I know in our case, the street has been studied, and apparently it was within the acceptable limit. I do want to question, though, the fact that there were 18 accidents at the corner of Fairmount and 55th within, I think, the last, was it 2 years? I forget the amount. Do you know, Sheriff? Whereas I think it was Lyman who supposedly had a higher traffic volume, had only, I think, 2 accidents. So I think that's, and my numbers may be off, but I really think that's an important statistic to pay attention to. And this is the last thing I'll say. The board comments from this board said, the board chair said, quote, "To me, we have to reset here and get rid of these lines and start again," end quote. There was another board member that said, quote, "A bunch of streets are cut-throughs, and that issue must be addressed comprehensively." And this person noted that if one street is made a dead end to address traffic, it will move to another street. So the dead ends that were created at Webster and the right turn only at Washington, I think I have those streets right, they've forced Fairmount to absorb some of that traffic, which was previously, used those roads to cut through. We've been told, we on Fairmount have been told that those same options are not available because it would divert traffic to other streets, negatively impacting them, which has happened to us, possibly. So the question is, or a fact seems to be that the first squeaky streets got all the oil, and the rest of us are having to put up with maybe some ineffective planning. So there's a question, has the village attempted a comprehensive plan for all of our streets, one that would not impact the home values on our street negatively? And again, I understand that that is a statistics that we don't know yet about the impact of the financial value. And lastly, there was a police chief who was part of the the committee that made the decision to paint the lines, and he agreed that it changed the aesthetic of the street and said he prefers raised tables, which are speed bumps. So again, I feel like if there's a chance that this could negatively impact, not it's sort of like a double whammy, where if you paint the lines and they aren't effective in reducing the speed and they reduce our property values, we've taken a double hit. So I would encourage you to take these articles and maybe some other research to task before you design a plan that will not only reduce speeding, but not affect the property values negatively on our street. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public on items A and B on the first reading agenda? Okay. I'll bring it back to the council now. There's, I think, a lot going on there. I'm going to start by addressing item A, which is the approvals on, or recommended approvals on the items that were already put into place by the village manager on Franklin and Middaugh. I think those are no-brainers, and I look forward to supporting those. With regard to Fairmount, I'm in support of the recommendations from TAP. I think the conclusion that they reached is correct, that that Fairmount and 55th does not meet the warrants for closing a street. And I think all of the statistics we've seen back that up. The speeds, as were noted earlier, were within anticipated levels. We've got a 30% reduction in traffic on Fairmount over the last few years, 34% on 55th Street, and no high crash locations. Now, the crash that did take place is truly horrific. And the fact that the folks that live on Fairmount had to witness that and deal with that is also horrific. But we have some experience with closing streets and requests to close streets very recently, and the impact on the entire neighborhood does have to be considered. Now, you're correct that Webster at 55th was closed. Gosh, I want to say about 8 or 9 years ago, if memory serves. But the issue there was closing it at 55th because of safety concerns at that particular intersection, because of sightline concerns. And we've not heard any evidence that that is actually in play here. And I believe the request to change the yield signs to stop signs, to put in certain four-way stops, will deal with the problem that we have at those intersections. I also remain opposed to speed humps. I think it's really a physical barrier, to be sure, but it has negative impacts on emergency response, on snow plowing, on other items. And I think it would similarly divert at least some traffic away from Fairmount and onto other streets, inadvertently creating one of the problems that closing the street would, albeit possibly in a lesser manner. But overall, I think the recommendation that came from TAP is the prudent one. I think it's the good first step. If there are additional problems or increased problems, we can always come back and revisit it. We've done that on other streets, and we would do it here. But I'm in support of the recommendation from TAP. Now, with regard to the concerns about striping, I could take that or leave it. If the folks on Fairmount are really concerned about striping causing speeding, which our professionals are saying otherwise, but I don't, that's not a hill that I'm interested in dying on. So if the neighborhood does not want the striping, I would be fine removing it. I'm interested in the comments from my colleagues. Anyway, Commissioner Sowski, if you could.
Yeah, and I first want to say I empathize, and I'm very sorry to all of the residents who had to experience that crash. There's no way that we can understand what you have been through, and I don't want to minimize that experience before I kind of talk about the rest of the issue. In terms of, obviously, all of the stop signs, those physical items, very much in favor of them. I think they're a long time coming. I do actually regularly traverse Fairmount, so I think I've set it up here before. I park here at Village Hall to get on the train to go to work, and my daughter goes to Fairmount. And so it is the street that I go south so that I can pick her up from Fairmount. And it is the last street east before you hit Fairview that goes through, which does make it slightly unique from a Webster or a Washington. I believe the concerns with Washington were more that it was so close to Maine that we kind of had some concerns there, and then the sight lines on Webster. I believe those were the reasons why we kind of made some of those decisions, and not necessarily the same things that we're seeing here. It isn't necessarily that it is a cut through. From what I understand, it was kind of designed to be a collector street. It was designed to be that kind of middle of the block, being able to access north and south. And we kind of see the speeds that we would expect, and the traffic volumes that we would expect from that, and actually decrease thanks to the pandemic. The one thing that I do want to say is that it's really hard to tease out whether property values are lower on streets that have striped lines because they are by design either collector or thoroughfares, and those, because they automatically have more traffic, tend to have lower values, or if, by painting the lines that happens. I've talked to a few real estate experts, and it really is hard to kind of tease some of those figures out. So I want to be careful when we start talking about some of these studies that correlation is not causation. And so I just think it's important that we kind of consider that as we talk about these village-wide options. I would imagine that if you asked 5 city planners, you would probably get 5 different answers on painted lines. I'm of the similar mindset of Commissioner Jose that striped lines are not the hill that I want to die on. And if they're going to give us a negligible difference, I don't see the value in, upsetting a neighborhood if we're not really going to be getting anything for it. One question I do have is, there are other ways that we've kind of visually reduced, the sight lines of drivers, even things like making lines for parking to help people recognize where they can park. I wonder if those could even be an option. There is parking on the street. That doesn't necessarily give you as much of a thoroughfare feel as striped yellow lines would. So I don't know if that's something that has any interest with my colleagues or with staff, but that was just one of the things that popped into my head in terms of trying to kind of visually narrow the street a little bit and make people recognize that it is still residential. Other than that, I think that's all all I have, and we thank you so much for all the work that's gone into this, and thank you to all of the residents who had to go through all of that trauma and then still show up for all of these meetings, so thanks.
Commissioner Glover?
Yeah, I agree with my fellow commissioners. I think item A is a no-brainer. As far as item B, as Commissioner Jose stated, I think the stop signs deal with the problem. When it comes to the striping, given the fact that the speeds and all the data is within the typical ranges, and the feedback that we've been receiving from the neighborhood that they're not in favor of it, property values, as you stated, I think that's could be controversial. I'd rather live on a street with lines than a bunch of crashes and fatalities. I know Scott had mentioned that there was other streets in this neighborhood with the yellow lines. Could we get further information on those streets?
We can get you the list.
Because I just didn't think it fit this street in this neighborhood.
There's a centerline stripe on Fairmount where the hill is. Yeah.
Right, okay. Further north,
Yeah, further north.
where it kind of winds.
It goes from Summit
Right.
up to back towards.
Okay. Okay.
South towards Randall.
So yeah, I mean, in general, I'm in favor of all the TAP recommendations, but again, like my fellow commissioners, I'd be interested in removing the stripe lines. That's all, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Commissioner Gilmartin?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Echo the same comments, Commissioner Sadowski, if you get mentioned. Clearly a tragic event, and by no means does my thoughts on this reflect how serious and how sorry I am that happened. I would say, from my perspective, I feel like the double yellow does do what I think we're looking for it to do. I agree, Commissioner Glover. The speeds seem to be relatively within range, and I was actually even a little bit surprised that they were lower than some of the other streets we've looked at historically. Even the 85th percentile was lower. But I do think this is a cut through. I think this is an opportunity for us to physically narrow. Now, I understand the idea that they aren't raised lines or aren't forcing folks through a physical barrier, but I do take the stance that I think the double yellow will have some control on slowing people down, not making people zip around others, and I just candidly don't subscribe to the fact that double yellows will have an impact on home values. I have a hard time believing that. I certainly would welcome any research that showed that, but I think we've got double yellows around town, and I think I would be surprised if that had that impact. So I'm more in favor of the double yellows combined with the new stop signs, which I think are a great addition. And if the balance of the council decides not to, then it's always something we can add. So, but I appreciate all this study in here, and I do appreciate the residents on both sides, those interested perhaps in the closure and those not. It's great to hear your feedback, because it just helps us look at these decisions from the level of those living it. So, I think both the stop signs are great. I look forward to supporting that. I think I would support the double, and then I think on option A, which was the mid-off, again, I agree, no-brainer. So I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Davenport?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I would say, I'd like to congratulate the TAP Commission, as well as the residents, for giving this so much thought. I'm reminded of, the work that went into looking at pedestrian safety after Beth Dunlap was hit tragically at North High School several years back, and I think that started us on a path of looking at pedestrian safety in a lot of areas of town, and it's tragic. These things happen, but real credit to the residents and to the commission for taking the time to look at this more carefully and to make thoughtful recommendations to make the area safer, not just that street. The stop signs along Summit create an equal treatment for all those cross streets going north and south, which I think is the right way to go. I also would say that the idea that a double yellow line would reduce property values, I think, Leslie, you kind of stole my thunder there on the correlation situation. I mean, you think about where most of the time those double yellows happen are certainly on very, very busy streets. And so I think it's a more accurate statement to say that if you live on a very busy street, that would impact your home value more than the presence of striping, whether it be double lines or dotted dash lines, white lines on the edges or whatever. I also say we can't reject our own work on this, and it's hard to isolate any one element of this overall approach, right? But we know that this, in combination with these other elements, have made a positive impact where we've implemented this solution. So as much as I wouldn't die on this hill either, so to speak, but I do think that if you are going to start removing pieces of a solution that has worked in other places, you run the risk of it maybe being not as effective, right? So I think there's more of an argument to be made for keeping the yellow lines versus removing them. And there's one other point I wanted to make, but also I was struck by the fact that we have a 34% reduction in traffic levels since 2011, and that's taking into account the fact that Washington Street has had some changes and such, and I think validating comment about once you get further away from Main Street, it tends to not, the effect isn't as much. So, in fact, hopefully a lot of that traffic from Washington went back on the Main where it belongs. So, anyhow, once again, congratulations to residents. None of this would be talked about right now. None of these things would be happening but for this tragedy and our response to it. So I know it's not going to make everybody happy. Not everyone's getting what they want in this. That usually means to me that it's probably a pretty good solution because there just isn't a perfect answer here. And I'll also say that just because we're doing these things doesn't mean that we can't revisit this. We can't continue to monitor this. And if it turns out that striping is a real problem, it's not like those stripes couldn't be removed. But I think we need to move forward based on the good work of the commission. And that's all I have to say. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. And I want to echo the comments, thanking the public for bringing forward their concerns, the various petitions we've seen, and the good work of the TAP committee. We've got some great volunteers on our boards and commissions, and they do wonderful work. And many thanks to our staff for bringing everything together, studying not just one street, but the entire neighborhood yet again, and putting forth some great data so that we can make good policy decisions.
Thank you on that, Mayor Pro Tem. I'll just take a minute to recognize the exceptional work of Mike Tooman, our traffic manager, years of experience, and really played a guiding role in this whole thing to this point. So congratulations to Mike, and thank him for his hard work and efforts. We plan on putting this item on next week's agenda with the full council, and then obviously we set for a vote at that time. So look for that at next week's council meeting.
Very good.
The next item and final item on tonight's first reading is consideration of an ordinance authorizing the second special use extension for a property on Finley. And here to provide background information on this petition is our Community Development Director, Stan Popovich.
Thank you, Manager Fielman. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. This is a second extension for a special use at 3131 Finley Road, located in the northwest corner of the village at the southeast corner of Finley and Branding. The owner of the office building at 1400 Opus Place purchased the Finley Road property and demolished the building shown in this aerial picture and constructed a parking lot on the Finley Road property to provide additional parking for the tenants in the Opus Place building. This was approved right before the pandemic started. As we all know, the office and work environment has changed with office occupancy being down. The petitioner is proposing to make changes to the 1400 Opus Place building in an effort to attract tenants that would then use this parking space. So the petitioner is requesting a second extension to the approved special use ordinance 5817. I'm happy to answer any questions that the council and Mayor Pro Tem may have tonight.
Thank you, Stan. Any questions from the council? I guess that's an easy one. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Did I miss one, Leslie? I'm sorry. Any comments from the public? Thank you.
Good evening. I guess my conversation doesn't rise to the level of safety that the previous one does, but it really focuses on economic vitality for your community. My name is Bill Elwood. I'm an executive vice president with CBRE. I'm the leasing agent for this particular property. I've actually been leasing in the suburban market for 36 years. I currently lease 2 million square feet in your village and lease over 5 million square feet in the suburban market. As you can imagine, I'm not going to tell you anything that is going to be a surprise to you. The office world business is probably the most challenged that I've ever seen in my 36-year career. What's interesting is I served on the Economic Development Advisory Board for Orland Park for Mayor Dan McLaughlin for 15 years. And when strip centers sat vacant for a few years, residents were quite concerned, and even the village was quite concerned because they were losing, certain revenue, sales tax, et cetera. But I can assure you there are office buildings and spaces that have been vacant in excess of 10 years in the suburban market. So the market has been stressed for a long time, and it will continue to be stressed for the near future. The good news is, take comfort in the fact that the suburban market was challenged more so years ago, but now it's considered more favorable than the urban markets. So we're taking some comfort in that change in the tide. There seems to be a desire for tenants to want to occupy suburban office space. Having said that, there's still a lot of challenges with the debt markets and the work from home. We're never going backwards. We're never going back to the 5-day a week. We're going to be living in a world going forward where office buildings are occupied heavily on certain days and not so much on other days. But what's unusual about that is you can't make parking lots smaller, right? If everyone's there 3 days a week, they're there. And if they're not there the other 2, it's empty. So you will see challenges and potentially in your community where some of these office buildings don't make it. The good news is this particular owner is not only bought this property and took down a struggling restaurant and made it parking, which is an amenity for this particular asset. It's a pleasant looking parking lot. It's not filled with debris. It looks attractive. So when I show tenants space, they take comfort in the fact that hey, if my employees here are 3 days a week, there's a place to park. And that's a pretty nice parking lot, and it's very convenient. So that's an advantage this asset has over its competitors. And then next, this particular owner is about to invest several $1 million in this particular asset to enhance its appeal and attract more tenants. And I can assure you, that is unusual right now, because most owners are stressed, but this particular owner is investing going forward. So take comfort in that. T-Mobile's the anchor tenant in this particular building, and they have finally come back. And like most tenants, they've come back slowly, but they're back, and they're very happy that they're at Executive Towers. So I just wanted to give you the landscape of what's happening in our industry, and I would encourage you to support your office building owners and give them the arsenal they need to compete, and not only, within Downers Grove, but, compete against the other office owners along the east-west corridor marketplace. And Downers Grove is a great community. I've always touted it as a great address. By way of experience, all those Highland Landmark buildings on 31st and Highland, I leased all of them. Greg Bedeloff was the economic development coordinator at the time. Greg was extremely helpful in the leasing campaign, and Michael Casso has always been helpful to me. And so you have a desirable community. Support the office owners, because there's some challenging days ahead. So that's all I got to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Yeah, there's no doubt that we've seen a sea change in the office environment since COVID in particular. And I can tell you just from riding Metra downtown that there are a lot fewer people downtown on a day-to-day basis than there used to be. And I know that ripple effect takes place out in the suburbs as well. We've been very fortunate over the years to have very, very high occupancy rate in our Class A office space. And we do appreciate that there are challenges out there, but since we're going to go down this road, and I look forward to supporting this, but I do hope that you're able to land the tenant that you're looking for in the near future. We appreciate the investment in our community, but from one person's perspective, a parking lot in that spot doesn't scream highest and best use to me, at least not when it's sitting vacant. So I wish you all the luck in filling that spot and ensuring that the parking lot goes utilized rather than unutilized. Commissioner Davenport.
I'll just counter that, highest and best use is, I think it is highest and best use if it means that that building gets leased out to its maximum capability, and that definitely is beneficial to the village. But it can't sit like this forever, right? So,
that's kind of my point.
Which is why we have a limit on the number of times we can approve this, and this is the second ask, and so one more year, and hopefully some good things happen. It makes sense to have amenities like this to help attract good tenants, and hopefully this will help get that done. So I'm supportive of this extension. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay.
That ends our first reading tonight, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Fielder. I'm going to throw it right back to you for item 8, the manager's report.
Well, I will throw it back to you then, sir, because I have no manager's report.
All right. That takes us to item 9, the attorney's report. Ms. Petrarca.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Just 2 items tonight to present. The first is an ordinance amending Chapter 14 of the Municipal Code, and the second is an ordinance authorizing the second extension of Special Use Ordinance 5817 to permit an accessory parking lot use before the principal use is established at 3131 Finley Road. That's all. They will both be on next week's active agenda.
Thank you. Mayor Barnett is out, so that takes care of 10. Item 11 is council member reports. This is an opportunity for members of the council to talk about goings-on in the community and perhaps other items. I will start to my right with Commissioner Davenport.
Thank you to the community for a great Grow Fest this year, and no report otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to change it up. Commissioner Gilmartin.
No report, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Glover.
No report. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit.
Yeah, I am going to at least take it upon myself, since I have the seat up here, to remind everybody, in light of what we talked about in Fairmount Avenue, obviously that was a pretty significant crash, but it is not just our responsibility up here to ensure that we have a safe community. It is a collective responsibility that we all share. And so just to remind everybody out there that, there probably isn't a lot worth that extra 2 seconds you save by speeding 10 miles an hour over the speed limit to risk other people's safety. I'm going to be the old woman yelling at clouds now and say that I live off of Fairview, and I cannot tell you how many times I've been driving down Fairview and I get passed in the turn lane because I'm going 32 miles an hour, which is still 2 miles over the speed limit, by the way. Sorry, police. But it is just an important reminder that, we think that, we have to rush to that next appointment or that next thing. And truthfully, especially being somebody who rides the train on a regular basis, there's absolutely nothing in my life worth saving those 5 seconds over to potentially lose my own or cost the life of someone else. So again, we're going to do everything we can up here to try to maximize safety, but it is a collective responsibility, especially in as tight-knit of a community as we have in Downers Grove. On a completely separate note, the Grove Foundation's annual golf outing is going to be held on Saturday, September 9th. So if you're interested, go to grovefoundation.org or talk to one of the Grove Foundation board members. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank everybody who came out to our 4th of July parade. It was hot, but the council actually had enough candy to make it all the way down to the end of the parade route for the first time, at least since I've been up here. So a good time was had by all. So thanks to everybody for coming out. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Mayor Pro Tem, I move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much and good night.